Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Human Services Committee meeting. To my left is my student government counterpart, Katie DuPont. Say hello, Katie.
Hello.
So I'm glad you joined us tonight, Katie. And tonight we're going to be talking about pest issue in Ward 1, and Sharon Cameron of the Department of Health, the director, was kind enough to join us this evening to give us an overview of what's happening, why it's happening, and what we can do about it and what we are doing about it. So, Sharon?
Okay. I'm going to be talking about how we manage the rodent issues in the city, and we also have a representative from A1 Exterminators here tonight, and he'll be going into a little bit more depth about the life cycle of rodents and the control measures that we use. But I thought I would start with showing you a slide of one of our most common contributing issues that we see when we go out to address rodent complaints. There are lots of different sources of food for rodents that people aren't aware of in their homes, and here is a bird feeder. This is not a picture from Peabody, but this is something we typically see. There we go. Thank you. And we got to get the next generation to move the slides. Rodents can present a public health problem. There are diseases that they can transmit directly to humans, and there's a list of them there. They can also indirectly transmit diseases by tick or flea-borne diseases can be an indirect route of transmission, and they can also trigger asthma symptoms in folks who have asthma. I do think it's important to point out that all of those diseases you see there are reportable to the Board of Health, and our public health nurse would track those cases and do case investigations. So we would be aware if there were any clusters of diseases. We would be looking for geographic patterns, and I can tell you we have not had, other than salmonella, which is typically a foodborne illness, and we do see a lot of salmonella. Those other diseases are not diseases that we're seeing in Peabody. Many of these diseases, the route of transmission is through exposure to rat droppings or urine. So it is important that if people, this echo is a little distracting, for people to minimize their risk of exposure, that if you are dealing with a dead rodent on your property or you're cleaning up droppings, that you're using gloves, that you're disinfecting with bleach before you're handling anything, and you don't want to be dry sweeping up any droppings. Actually, I think we skipped one.
No, this is the third one.
Oh, okay. I'm out of order. Okay. So this is what we've been seeing for rodent complaints in Peabody over the past 3 years. You can see 2017, we had significant increases in the number of complaints we had throughout the whole city. Next slide, please. This is a national issue. Actually, I meant to put this slide first. We are seeing, I can tell you that I meet regularly with the boards of health on the North Shore, and all of the communities on the North Shore are seeing the same sort of increase in rodent activity. And this is an article from the New Republic talking about it as a national issue as well. Next slide, please. So this is a map of where we had the rodent complaints in 2017, and you can see they're throughout the city, but most of our complaints are coming in the more densely populated area of the city, and that's because rodents like to live where people like to live, because we provide them with food and water and sources of harborage. And the gentleman from A1 will go into that a little bit more. Next, please. So our response protocol is our first step is to do the intake of the complaint, and we do have an excellent database where we log all of our complaints, and then we have the ability to track them. We do the mapping that you've seen. I know you can't read this, but I wanted you to see that we have a formal process for intake of complaints, and it's really important that we hear from the complainants directly, because we can get a lot of information from talking to a complainant that we don't get if we're receiving the complaint secondhand. So as counselors, I know you receive a lot of complaints, and I would encourage you to, in addition to letting me know that you've received the complaint, encourage the complainant to also contact us directly so we can do a little bit more of an interview with them. We also want to hear from the complainants again after we've gone out and done our neighborhood assessments and walkthroughs, because typically when we're out in the field, we're not generally seeing the rodent activity. A lot of it is nocturnal activity, so we really need to hear from the residents, has there been an improvement in the issue or not? So really encourage people to contact us. Sometimes people are reluctant to call, they feel like they're bothering us. We really get a lot of important information from them. Next, please. So after we do the intake of the complaint, we assign it to the inspector, and the inspector walks the neighborhood with these leaflets. You may have seen them. I have copies here if anybody would like to grab a few. I'll leave them behind. And this, again, this flyer was developed as part of our regional public health working group. So all of the 8 communities on the North Shore are using the same flyer, so we're being very consistent with our messaging. And basically what we're talking about is cleaning your property, maintaining standards of sanitation, sealing up entry points into your home, and then trapping or otherwise treating the rodents. Those are basically the 3 steps. So when we get a rodent complaint, we really leaflet the whole neighborhood with this material. And as part of our leafletting, while the inspectors are out in the neighborhood, they're also looking for properties that might have nuisance conditions that could be contributing to a rodent issue. So these are pictures that have been taken in Peabody by our inspectors out on some of these visits, and these are the sort of conditions we see that would cause us to either do some education with the homeowner or in some cases actually issue citations to get the properties cleaned up. So these are the most common conditions we see on our neighborhood walkthroughs that concern us. The number one thing is the way we're managing trash. If people have uncovered trash or an inadequate number of trash receptacles to handle the whole week's worth of trash and trash is overflowing, that is a major source. We're looking for people who aren't composting properly. They're putting food waste in the compost piles. People feeding pets outdoors. Bird feeders is a big one. Even pet waste. Rats will feed off a dog poop in your backyard. Yard waste and vegetable gardens can all be sources of food for pests. After we've done the neighborhood education and we have worked with homeowners to eliminate nuisance conditions, if we're still getting feedback from the residents in the neighborhood that the pest problem is continuing, at that point we would call A1 Pest Control, who is the contracted company that the city works with, and we would ask them to send a technician out. So they'll send their technician out into the neighborhood, and he will look for a lot of the same things that we've just talked about, conditions that would provide food, water, or harborage for pests. He'll report those findings back to us so that we can issue citations if we need to, and then he will make a recommendation as to whether baiting of the sewers is called for. The city does not bait on private property, but we will authorize bait in the sewers when the exterminator feels it's appropriate. Oh, could we go back just one slide? I just did want to point out that bottom picture are burrows under a fence, and that's one of the things that we're looking for and that we tell homeowners to look for, is that this is a sign that you do have rat activity on your property, looking for those sort of burrows. These are the streets that we baited in 2017. Next one, please. So the approach that we take in Peabody and the approach that is being taken by all the health departments on the North Shore is we're really trying to promote integrated pest management. And that's a really comprehensive way to address the problem. It's not just focusing on poisoning rats. It's really looking at the environmental sanitation, the way we're storing food and trash, rodent proofing of homes, and then, of course, controlling the rodents through trapping and poisoning. But it's a really comprehensive approach. As health departments on the North Shore, we've put out an RFP. We have some grant money, and we have put out an RFP to develop a regional IPM plan. Again, consistency is important, and the IPM plan, in addition to calling for us to do public education about sources of food, water, and harborage, it'll address things like how are we storing trash, both residentially and commercially? Are we requiring covered barrels? Are we allowing people to put out trash bags at curbside? There's opportunities to consider ordinances around things like that. What are we planting in our parks and in other public spaces? How are we maintaining vegetation so it's not providing harborage for rodents? Another opportunity for ordinances is to look at requiring pest control as part of our processes for issuing building permits, road opening permits, trench permits, planning board approvals. One of the things we've recently implemented in the health department about a year and a half ago is that we are now requiring IPM plans for anybody seeking a food establishment permit. And then lastly, there's the role of code enforcement. There are many state codes that provide us the tools we need to address this. Under the state sanitary code for housing, we do have the, we can require people to store trash in covered receptacles, but they are, under the state code, allowed to put bags out at curbside on the day of collection. Under the food code, we have the opportunity to address the issues around trash management and grease management with people who hold a food permit with us. We have a state nuisance law that allows us to address unsanitary conditions on any type of residential or commercial property. And some communities have implemented systematic code enforcement, and that's something we could consider doing here as well, because we will have additional code enforcement resources where they kind of proactively go out into the neighborhoods, just door to door, looking for nuisance conditions that could create health problems in the neighborhood. So that's certainly a discussion we could have about systematic code enforcement as well. So that is all I have. Do you want me to have questions, or do you want me to have A1?
Why don't we open it up to questions and we can invite him up if he's the expert? Sure. Thank you very much, Sharon. And council members, we have a full... Can you hear me now? We have a full complement of the council tonight, but members of the Human Services Committee are councilors Melville, Mitsoulas, O'Neill, and Rosignol. So I'll open it up to the councilors. Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. First and foremost, Sharon, I wanted to say thank you very much because I have received a lot of these phone calls, and your department is on it within 24 hours. So you've made it easy for me, and I received a little education from you via several phone calls. But one thing that I also did was I reached out to a friend that owns A1 Pest Management, which also does work for the city of Peabody, Jeff Weisberg. And he said, John, he said, it's not a city of Peabody issue. He said, it's a state issue. He says, it's statewide. He said, I would love to tell the city of Peabody, pay me, and I could fix this for you. He said, it doesn't happen because I won't even take money from neighborhoods to try to fix this. He mentioned the warm winters that we've had and how the rat populations have doubled because of the warm winters, and that if we did have a cold spell, that it would alleviate some of the issue. And that, along with this information that Sharon's department drops off, I think would be very, very helpful. But Sharon, my question to you would be, so did you say that we don't have anything in ordinance that requires new subdivisions to do pest management plans or treatment?
I'm not aware of it. That wouldn't be issued through my office. We do work with the building department, so when they issue demolition permits, we have to sign off on those. As part of that sign-off, we do require pest control as part of those projects. But other than that, I'm not aware that it's a formal requirement, but I'm probably not the best person to ask on that issue.
Thank you, and honestly, I'm not sure if it is or not. If in fact we find out that there is no requirement, would you be willing to help us draw, write up a portion of the ordinance to make the change to require it? That's terrible.
Absolutely, and one of the things as part of the RFP that we have put out for a regional IPM plan is we've asked the vendor to give us template language for ordinances around many of these issues.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be something that the council would be very interested in, so, and I'll make a motion to have that sent. But lastly, Madam Chairwoman, before I end, and this would be up to you, I have Leslie Bateman that lives at 1 Rainbow Road after the council speaks to Sharon Cameron. Leslie was one of the residents that first contacted me about issues in the Rainbow Road area, and she didn't know that if she could speak or not, but I would like her to be able to just come up and say a few words at some point. Thank you.
And we do have someone from A1 Exterminators here this evening. Would you like to join us, sir, since you're the expert on the matter? And if you could just state your name and address into the record, please.
My name's Jeffrey Weisberg, A1 Exterminators.
After the discussion here tonight, are there certain things you'd like to share with us, or?
Yes, I put together a presentation that I wanted to bring everyone through City Council really to get you more informed about rodent control. I've been talking with the Department of Health, Board of Health here, and what they're doing, which is seems to be all the right initiatives, but just kind of wanted to bring you through quick soup to nuts on rodent control, and the point being that it's not just a City of Peabody problem. It is a national problem. It's a worldwide problem, and you are seeing it locally. And there are a lot of different strategies and things that can be done, and just kind of want to bring you through the biology, habits, behaviors, and just some of the basics to have you more informed. So, get started off. Sharon had mentioned IPM, which is a buzzword for integrated pest management. That's really, since the early 90s, has really kind of become something in our industry, so to speak, in agriculture, and pest control and pest management. But it's been around, for well over 100 years. And IPM, it's a common sense approach to pest management that utilizes a variety of different methods. It's just not the reliance on pesticides or rodenticides to fix a problem. It's more holistic, that covers structural, sanitation, modifications, controls, changing habits and behaviors. It's trying to find what the source of the problem is and correct the sources to alleviate the problem. And part of that can be the implementation of rodenticides and things of that nature. So I put together, this is an IPM puzzle, and as you can see, it's not just pesticides or rodenticides, it's inspection, sanitation plays a critical role, what the conditions of the property are, or surroundings, whether it be residential or commercial, mechanical controls, exclusion, keeping them out of people's homes and businesses is important. And you even had the picture of going underneath, burrowing under decks. Well, exclusion even fits there. Keeping them out from harboring. Trapping, educating the community is extremely important. More people know about it, the more aware they're going to be of what to do or not to do. Documentation comes in a variety of different forms. From Pest Control, we document, what we see when we're there, whether there's trash and debris, whether there's, various refuse, what have you. Administrative support, working with, City of Peabody has been great. So having good administrative support to work together to help resolve a problem. And then eventually, application of, pesticides, what we're doing now, which is in the sewers and things like that, if we find there's something to do. There are other applications that can be made, and we can talk about that in a little bit. You're going to have to keep So we're going to talk about general biology. The Norway rat is the dominant rat that is in North America, especially in the Northeast. And a female will have 8 to 12 pups per litter, and they typically have 4 to 8 litters per year. And their lifespan is on average about a year. If they don't have any natural predators or people like ourselves that are going after to get rid of them, they can live up to 3 years. But approximately 20 pups or offspring are produced per year by one rat. So you can quickly kind of see how the problems can multiply. And that doesn't always happen because there's other factors in play. There's other wildlife that will prey on them. There's people that will hire professionals like ourselves. Sometimes they get run over by cars. It could be any number of things that will keep that down. But we do, because they're so prolific, we do see populations that increase. Behavior is a factor. Their behaviors. They have social and the social colonies. Their range. People always want to know, well, how far are they going to travel? Their typical range is 50 to 100 feet when they have food, water, and shelter nearby, but that can expand if things are scarce. They do have a social order or hierarchy. The dominant rats will be active at night, and the subordinate rats will get kicked out and be active more during the day. And so essentially the runs of the litter are the ones that people are going to see in the daytime. And that's normal. One of the big factors with Norway rats are, it's called, they're neophobic, which means that they're afraid of new things that enter into their environment. So when they get established and they map out and they learn all their surroundings and something new comes into place, they're very cautious and shy of it. So as a pest control technician, if we go into a location and they're established and we set traps, they can avoid those traps for days, sometimes weeks, because they're shy and they're afraid of something that's going to happen. And that's just a normal occurrence. So you have to use a lot of other strategies to try to push them, move them, and ultimately eradicate them. And also, when we're baiting, a lot of people will think, well, you put out bait, why didn't the problem resolve right away? Well, bait shyness is the other thing. They're, again, cautious of new things in their environment. So it can take time. It's not always a quick fix. So we just have a picture of a typical Norway rat. This slide brings you through the basic reproductive cycle, just like anything else. They mate. Gestation is just over 20 days. They wean, and then within 3 months, they're mature again, and they're right back at it. Commensal, that's one thing in our industry. Rodents, whether any rodent is commensal, and that means sharing one's plate. Whether it's a house mouse on the left or whether it's a Norway rat, which has a meaning to us. Because it's sharing one's plate, it means that they want to be in and around and amongst us. So we are, as people, are providing everything, for the most part, that they need to live and thrive. So they want to be feeding off of our trash. They want to enter our homes and structures. We're providing them everything that they need. So we'll talk a little bit about their physical abilities and senses because they're pretty unique creatures. They can swim. They can swim a half mile and tread water for days. believe it or not. So they can just keep going. It's normal. They have a pretty good long jump, 3 feet, and they can survive a 25 to 50 foot drop. So if one were to fall off a building, doesn't mean that that's going to be it. They're strong. They're great climbers. One of the big ones is, in order to, people are like, well, how do I keep them out of my house? Well, they only need a ½ inch opening to gain access. So ½ inch or the size of a quarter is not a lot. So exclusion, as I talked about earlier, is really important. And they do have similar senses as mice, which we're not going to get into those habits and behaviors. It's a completely different topic, but very similar. And a picture of one swimming, which is common. What we have here is some habitat, someone's basement. There's a lot of trash and debris. You can see lots of rodent droppings in there. Basically, food, water, and shelter. That's what they're looking for, and that's where they're going to thrive. So one of the things we do with the city of Peabody, and we do this for a lot of other general contractors that are doing road work projects and things like that, is we'll bait the sewer systems. Rats live and breed in sewer systems, and they travel very easily through the sewers into people's homes. So in order to minimize or mitigate them from entering someone's house and reduce those populations, we bait them. They feed off the bait and they die. But when we don't do that and the populations are high, they can very easily find their way through pipes and things of that nature. It's not uncommon. People sometimes post them on social media or Facebook, of a video of someone lifts up the toilet and there's a rat in the toilet. Well, how'd it get there? Well, got there through the sewer. It's common, especially in urban areas. People that are on septic systems, it's not as much. We really don't see that because it's self-contained. But public cities, we do. City of Boston, it happens frequently. New York, Philly, any major metropolitan urban area. So rats have the ability to apply 8,000 pounds of pressure per square inch with their teeth. I don't know about you guys, but that's a lot of pressure. So they can chew and gnaw through just about anything. So you can keep going. So this is a picture taken years ago, but it shows how people's homes and living environments, can contribute to the harborage of rodents. Hoarders, we see a lot of those in our industry, and I know a lot of other people do as well. And the more trash and debris and harborage area you have, the easier it is for them to gain a foothold, become undetected, and then become commonplace. So a picture like that, you don't want that scenario.
And if I may, I know that Councilor Gould, did you have a question? I'd like to. Who knew there was so much to learn about rats? I'd like to give the councils an opportunity to ask you questions or Sharon Cameron questions, and also allow the member of the public that wanted to speak tonight to be able to do that. So, Councilor Gould?
I'll defer to our resident if that's okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Certainly.
Give her an opportunity.
Hi, ma'am. How are you? Great. Sure, if you could just step up to the podium and tell us your name and address for the record.
Hi. My name is Leslie Bateman. I live at 1 Rainbow Road, which was one of the streets that was shown that had been baited. My question is about the baiting. Are they left alive? Do you let them out? Are they killed? Are they poisoned? Because I'm poisoning them.
Yes, in that instance, to answer your question, when we're baiting, baiting is with rodenticide. So once they feed off of that, they will die typically a few days after consumption.
All right, because in the meantime, the whole neighborhood is putting rat poison out. I have my grandson that comes down the house. I tell him, you can't step in the mulch. There's rat poison. I tell everybody, make sure your dogs are not on my property because there's rat poison. It's under my shed. It's around my yard. I sent John 2 pictures on my cement slab out in the backyard of 2 dead rats. I got a 3rd one in the grass. My yard is maintained every week by a landscaper. The house out and back, same thing. They have a big pool with a big cement slab all the way around it, no grass, and they got up one morning and there was 4 rats playing out there. So is it a problem? It is. A big one. I grew up in this city 65 years when all these leather factories were prime and they were dumping into the canals and going out to the North River, and when this place would flood down the square, believe you me, the rats jumped out. But was it because of what they were doing? They had chemicals, they had hides, they had tannin things. You expected that then. You don't expect it up in your residential areas, especially when there's kids out there playing and the little kids down the street, they're running across the front lawn. So it's a big issue. And of course, I retired in March, so now I have plenty of time. So I'm actually on rat patrol in South Peabody. That's what it boils down to. I have to focus on something. But it really is a big issue. And so if they're bringing you in, you baited Rainbow Road that I saw, and Rainbow Circle was baited. But, you know, you can't bait it 24/7, I guess. So the idea is, how do we really get rid of them? You know, everybody's throwing poison out. I know that there's a big issue with the recycling and everything getting blown all over the city. And I do know that Lynn and other surrounding areas have gotten the nice big containers with the covers on them through the trash. So these are all avenues that are going to have to be checked out too. Because, I mean, I can have a baseball bat and rat poison, but I can't be running around my yard 24/7. But no, so that's really why I was here too also tonight, was to, you know, it really is an issue. And I know other councilors have gotten calls too from the city. And again, John, you had mentioned about the new development, number 1 going up in West Peabody, but the one up off of Bartholomew Street. Again, there's going to be more rats. They're going to be uprooting them. And then it's going to double with complaints. So maybe, like you said, the suggestion of taking that into and putting that into the developer's hands and say, look, you got to start baiting as you're digging and you're blasting. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out tonight, and we appreciate your input. Councilor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairwoman. Just a quick question of Sharon Cameron. Sharon, please. Sharon, I wasn't real comfortable, or maybe you can clarify for me. We now have a requirement for every food establishment to have a pest control program, which we didn't in the past?
So we always, as part of the food code, as part of our inspectional process, we have always checked pest records and looked for signs of droppings and things like that. But over the past year and a half, we asked people to put together an IPM plan and submit it to us as part of the licensing process. So this is actually the second, this year will be the second full year of implementing that. So, you know, we've done a lot of hand-holding with establishments to try to get them to the point where they're not just throwing out bait boxes, but they're really thinking in a more IPM way about, you know, how are they storing their trash and how are they sealing up openings in their establishments and things like that.
I know owning a restaurant, I'm part of that, and you've been very helpful getting us organized on that. You know, keep up the good work on that. Sharon, next question. Is there anything we can do within our trash pickup program to maybe in the long run eliminate the free throwing of trash bags curbside as opposed to putting them in a barrel? Would that help? And if it would help, how do we get going on that?
Yeah, I think it would help. It's not something we can require under the codes that we enforce, but I think it could be done through city ordinance. We cite properties all the time, particularly multifamilies, for not having enough trash receptacles to allow their tenants to store the trash over the week, but we don't have anything that allows us to prohibit the bags at curbside.
And if I may, Councilor Manning Martin, I'm not on this committee, but maybe we look at that in the future as a change. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Very good suggestion, Tom. Are there any, yes, Council Melville.
Through the chair, Sharon, is there a plan? So I've heard a lot, and we discussed this as well, folks on Bartholomew Terrace and Fairview Ave, basically around Tilly's, and then I've heard from some folks that are up in the Brooksby Farm area. And vegetation seems like it was a main source of, central location where a lot of these pests come from. Is this, do the other city departments that are maybe have these vegetation areas that are they aware of, or are they following some of the same standards to prevent this?
Yeah, so I've had discussions with the folks at the Parks Department about, trying to keep the vegetation cut higher, and also even thinking about, what are they putting in the public parks in terms of trash receptacles? We've got the beautiful wrought iron black trash receptacles, but they're not rodent-proof, and a lot of times, unfortunately, residents will dump their residential trash in the parks and things like that. So thinking about whether or not it makes sense to have a carry-in, carry-out policy in the parks as opposed to having these receptacles there that might only get picked up once a week and aren't rodent-proof. So we definitely have had those discussions.
Thank you.
Council McGinn.
Thank you, Councilor Manning Martin. I'm not on the committee, but thank you for letting me comment. First and foremost, we've had some issues in Ward 2, as Director Cameron knows, and like Councilor Turco, I would like to thank you very much for the exceptional support out of your department on this and many other issues. I think the point that Councilor Gould raised about recycling and how this maybe dovetails into the other issue, and it's kind of playing out in industrial and community development, is an excellent point. And while we are dealing with that, and your comment earlier was that is the number one contributing issue, right? The containment of trash, and it's not even that it's in a barrel, but it's got to be in a covered barrel with a secure lid. I mean, what I see is, yeah, it might be in a barrel, but they're all overflowing, and it's not just on trash day. They're being left like that for days. I think we need to address that somehow. So my request would be, I guess through you to Councilor Gould, would be that we incorporate your inputs, Director Cameron, in that other separate but related issue that's in industrial community development with respect to the trash issue. Thank you.
Any other further comments from the council? All right, well, excellent. As usual, you've been phenomenal. You're very receptive to the council, and again, I think all the accolades that you and your department got this evening are absolutely well-deserved, so I thank you very much, and thank you, sir, for joining us as well. And so that concludes the first portion of our meeting. The second item on the agenda, actually, Councilor Melville requested it be on, and it is information regarding the recently released data from the last census regarding the doubling of Peabody's poverty level. And this is such a complex issue that there really isn't concrete data on it in one place. But what we were able to do was Laura McNeil of NASCAP was kind enough to join us this evening and give us a kind of a thumbnail or a presentation of the trends that are going on now and are affecting the city of Peabody, and she's been kind enough to come this evening. But this, again, is just a thumbnail, and it's a courtesy of hers to come and present to us with her knowledge. So I thank you very much, Laura.
I didn't know, I didn't realize like I could do a fancy presentation. I went old school, I have paper. And I didn't think so many people would be here. I have 12 copies to share.
Excellent, that's wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
My lovely assistant will help out.
So I'm the Executive Director of North Shore Community Action Programs. We're the designated anti-poverty agency, for those of you who don't know, for Peabody, Beverly, Danvers, and Salem. And NASCAP has been here since 1965. So when I was first asked this question, I want to say it was in the fall, from a reporter from the Peabody Advocate or one of the newspapers. My first response was, how do I know why it increased in Peabody? But, you know, I said, let me go back and look at what I know about NASCAP, the clients that we serve, and just did a very quick look. And really the best answer that I could give him was, I have not seen a big increase at NASCAP in Peabody residents. It's remained relatively steady over the past 9 years or so. However, we also know that the middle class is shrinking and that income range is polarizing in the region and in the country. So after I got the request to come present to you, I thought, well, I really got to look into this and try to find some answers for you. I can't tell you why specifically poverty is increasing in Peabody. It really is complex. It require really someone doing a longitudinal study looking over multiple issues: employment, population trends, housing, just so many different factors. However, the Brookings Institute did actually look at why is poverty increasing in the suburbs. And I did a lot of plagiarizing here. In your packet is the cover sheet and the title page of the document that I pulled most of my information from. And I did a very, very quick summary. It's very rough, so forgive me. And I left my more detailed notes in the office, I'm sorry. But of the major trends that they saw about why poverty is shifting to the suburbs and why is it increasing. And it has pretty much started since the 1970s, where at that time poverty was, most poor people lived in the rural South. They were distributed across metropolitan urban areas, suburbs, but primarily in the rural areas. And over these 40 years, it has switched. And the increase has been to the suburbs. A lot of that, and when we talk about poverty, we're talking about very poor people. For a family of four, again, I left my notes at the office, but a family of four, the poverty rate's, in the high 20s, low 30s. Who can raise a family on that? You can't. And what they call near poor is around 200% of the federal poverty level. That's a family of four is making $60,000 or more. Now we're talking real money. That's near poor. Those are people that still can't make ends meet and help their family. And NASCAP does serve those families. They're eligible for fuel assistance and weatherization programs. So, it's a situation where populations are moving. The recession in the 2000s certainly moved it along, and employment factors. The near poor living in suburbs now is 1 in 4. That's the near poor. People living at or below the federal poverty level in the suburbs is 1 in 9. But that doesn't mean that they left the cities to come here. There's still plenty of poor people in the cities. It's 1 in 5 people in the cities are poor. That's 20%, as opposed to 25% of the population in the suburbs. This is also across the United States, although there are pockets where it's a little denser, like the Northeast, where our housing stock is aging, where jobs have been shifting. And in the in the Midwest, it's been shifting from the rural areas to we know that Detroit and Chicago and those areas have problems with poverty. In around the early 2000s, there was a small recession, then the economy stabilized, and then we had the big recession. During that time, wages started to drop a little bit, then they stagnated, and they've really not moved a whole lot since then. Manufacturing jobs went down at that same time. The unemployment rate went down, and when the unemployment rate goes down, poverty goes with it. But this time, when the unemployment rate recovered, the poverty rate did not move with it because the jobs that were created were low-wage jobs. The jobs that were lost were manufacturing jobs, and those were the jobs for working people that could support their family. And where did they go? They went into the low-wage jobs. So the manufacturing industry really has not totally recovered, and with that, decent-paying jobs. Another thing that happens is, in the Northeast especially, the housing stock is aging. People want to live in newer, nicer homes. They want, floor designs changed. They want bigger houses. So they move to where that housing is. And the jobs have also moved there. The jobs have left, the higher-paying jobs. Just look at the 128 corridor, right? All the tech jobs are out on 128. It's only recently that jobs are back starting to move to the urban areas. So people left the cities, moved out to the urban areas, and people did move with that, but mostly poor people stay put. They don't move with the jobs, right? These jobs are for higher income, higher educated people. Those that did move and follow the jobs, families, immigrants, they're also more vulnerable to poverty, to drop into poverty when the economy changes. And it's harder for them to recover as well. The urban areas are also gentrifying. I mean, I was just down by the seaport last week, and wow, is it nice. Think about what the seaport was looking like 15 years ago in Boston. You don't want to go there. I was like, ooh, this is like a whole new city. Maybe I'll move there. It's beautiful. Poor people aren't going to live there. Where did all those people who were there go? Okay, so again, it's not that people are moving to Peabody. It's more that people who are living in Peabody are becoming poor. The cost of living has increased, wages have stagnated, and thus they're falling into poverty or near poverty. Also, the subprime mortgage fiasco certainly contributed to people who were just getting by, falling back into poverty because they lost that asset. They took their savings that were in those homes and they've lost it due to foreclosure. So those are the general trends about why suburban poverty increased. I don't think Peabody's done anything wrong, or it's just a national trend. I find it fascinating. I had a short period of time to really research this. I would like to do more research into it and be able to present that to you and understand it better. This book from the Brookings Institute, Confronting Suburban Poverty in America, actually did a lot of case studies about cities that tried to tackle this issue, cities and towns, and I have not had a chance to really go into it enough for me to feel confident speaking to you about it, but people are looking at it and they are trying to make a dent in it and trying different things. So that's what I have to offer.
Very simple, right? No, thank you very much for joining us this evening and sharing your expertise. Yes, Councilor Melville.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Councilor Manny Martin, also for setting this up. I made the motion to bring this to our committee because of exactly what you said. My concern really is that it's not so much of influx, because if you look at Lynn, Salem, Beverly to some extent, they're all seeing the same issue. They're seeing a rise, and it's in some ways inexplicable. But all the research I've done since that day to now has told me that a lot of the solutions are going to be found within transportation, housing stock, all of the key ingredients that you're seeing occur in places like the seaport, where I deal with a lot of developers, I deal with brokers, and where you see areas that are gentrifying or increasing the values, it's really around that. It's around transportation and housing stock. So that was a big takeaway from me. Really what I wanted to get out of this, and there's a lot of information, and this is never going to be solved, is what concerns me is that the poverty levels as they're set, if you look at it, they're just arbitrary numbers set by the federal government. In some ways, I think a lot of them are set well beyond, they don't adjust for inflation. There's a number of different things. What concerns me is we're seeing the numbers of the people that are falling below that line. There's quite a large population that are teetering above it. I know we have Carolyn Wynn from the Senior Center, and her and I had a discussion not long ago regarding some of this with senior citizens and the housing issues that they're facing with fixed incomes. So I think this is something that the council is going to have to, in the city, frankly, in the region as a whole, is going to have to address as we go forward. Is the gap between the haves and the have-nots is going to increase, and this number is going to be something we have to address and look at. I'm not looking for solutions, and I don't think anybody can come up with any solutions, but I think it's important that these numbers be something we monitor, and I would ask that the administration of the city just pay attention to when these things come. I know they are, and they're doing everything. But we had a motion tonight we had something in front of us tonight to adjust the inclusionary zoning, which would impact housing and the prices of housing. And these numbers are what we want to keep in mind when we see those things, and when those come before us. And I think I'm going to do a lot more research. I will definitely be reaching out and getting your thoughts on some of this information, because I don't think this is the last time, at least I'm going to be talking about it. I know this council is very concerned. Everybody on here is very active in the community and charity work and does a number of great things. But for me, seeing that number, this was a quantitative exercise of saying, all right, can we identify, is this incoming or is this internally people falling into a new income level, I guess. But thank you very much.
If I may, just one thing that I sit on a committee for the Workforce Investment Board, the Skills Gap Committee, and the area where they're having the hardest place filling jobs, even though the jobs haven't increased, is in the manufacturing area. Kids are getting liberal arts degrees, and they're not prepared to go into these more technical jobs in the manufacturing field, and that's where the jobs are starting to increase. That's where you can get a job for $60,000, $70,000 and support your family, and they're having a hard time filling them. So, something to consider.
Thank you. Councilor Gould?
Thank you, Councilor Manning Martin. I'm not a member of the committee, but thank you for letting me speak. I'll make it brief. Laura, thank you for everything NASCAP does, and you personally. One stat that jumps out at me, and I'd love to know how we can help with that, is you currently hold leases with more than 10 Peabody property owners, paying over almost $250,000 a year. How can we help?
Actually, the city of Peabody really helps a lot already. The planning department allocates a fair amount of your home money towards tenant-based rental assistance, which provides a temporary rental assistance for people who are struggling to make their mortgage, or not mortgage payments, their rent payments. We keep them housed until they can stabilize and then either find a roommate or find a better paying job or find a way to continue to pay the rent on their own. In general, supporting housing that is smaller, apartments that are more affordable, rental apartments, would be helpful. There's never enough affordable rental housing. And again, it's because during the economic downturn, people lost their homes, they moved into the nicer apartments, and that just put the squeeze on the rental market. And now, I mean, you can't get a decent apartment for less than $1,300 a month.
Well, I'd like to commend the mayor and the community development group and Stacy and everybody that helps with that. I went on a tour of our a census of the homeless recently with some employees here at Peabody and the police, and I was shocked that the number had gone down. We could not, it was a very, very bitter cold night, and we were fortunate that we only found 2 people sleeping outside that night. We did it for 3 straight nights, and 2 people on 3 nights, and so whatever we're doing, let's keep it up, but please keep us involved in whatever we can do to help. Thank you.
Councilor Turco?
Thank you, Council Manning. Just a quick point, Laura. You brought up manufacturing, and I wanted to mention to you that the school districts are very aware of it. We had Dr. Lupini here from the VOC several months ago, and he mentioned that they were looking at adding programs to the VOC specifically for manufacturing. So the issue is in the forefront. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Demo?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming and educating us this evening. I didn't know what direction you were going in, and I grew up in this city. I've been in this city all my life, and I was in the city when I think the best of times existed, and that's when the tanneries were all in full bloom. You could go down to Walnut Street and get a job in one tannery, quit that day or get fired or whatever, and just go to the next building, get a job. You know, manufacturing was alive, and I just remember everybody was making a living. It was whether we were living in poverty or not at the time, I don't think anybody knew it. I mean, we were all just coexisting and raising families, going to school, just enjoying life, you know. And I have my own theories about what happened, and that's what I didn't want to get into, because if we get into this, our own theories, we could be talking about this forever. What happened to the tanneries? They all left. They all went overseas. What were the reasons? Environmental reasons, whatever those reasons were. And I'm just, I was very sad to see this happening. I think the reason I brought this up is because of your knowledge. What do you see now? How do you see how do you see the economy going? We're hearing every day millions of jobs are being created. Manufacturing is coming back. We're starting to take the tariffs off. We're starting to bring businesses back into this country. Do you see this, or is this... And I'm not asking you a question to put you on the spot. I think I'm asking you a question because I think you're a little more knowledgeable than I am, and I just want to know if what I'm seeing is happening.
What we see with the people that come in for assistance, many of our clients work, but they work part-time, and they earn minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage. Or they work, and many of them work multiple jobs. So that means that they're dependent on Mass Health because they don't have an employer that provides health insurance. If they do have an employer that provides health insurance, it's very expensive and it takes a big chunk of their income to pay for that, so they have very little left over to pay the bills. A lot of the jobs that are available for people with a high school education or who have not finished their high school education or college education are in the hospitality service industries, and they tend to be part-time, low-wage jobs. Transportation is a big issue. There's lots of jobs on Route 1. People can't get to them if they don't have a car because there's no public transportation going up and down Route 1. And that's something I've talked about over and over again. Is there a way that NASCAP can create a shuttle bus to get people at least to the hotels where there's jobs where they can work? You know, the transportation is a big issue around here. For a while, there was a shuttle that went down 114 for people to get to jobs that the Career Center had. I don't think that exists anymore. So that's another factor about people getting to jobs. Having adequate child care is a problem. Child care is very expensive. Families don't live close together anymore. It used to be mom could watch the kids while the parents were working, or there's so many confounding factors that prevent people from being able to have enough income to support their families. Yeah, I mean, the Workforce Investment Board, the meetings I go to, a lot of the jobs are in the medical industry, high tech, but they require advanced degrees, master's degrees, PhDs. Not jobs that somebody that's just gone to North Shore Community College can walk into and get a job that, you know, they can do. Does that help?
I think my question was probably more on a national level that I don't think you're in a position to answer, but maybe I shouldn't have asked you that question. It was probably something that just came out of the fact that we were a manufacturing city at one time, and it was brought up. But I see why you're here, and I see your concern, and I totally support you in your endeavor. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Gravel?
Thank you, and thank you, Laura, for coming and taking on a topic that not a lot of people want to take on, but it's an interesting topic. And, you know, when people talk about manufacturing today, and when you hear Dr. Lapini talk about manufacturing programs, they're not the leather shops of old. They're advanced manufacturing. They're technological manufacturing. And it drives higher incomes because there's a higher level of training required to be able to perform in those jobs. Even at this point in time, those who work in places like Amazon in their distribution center have to have a certain amount of technological capability and knowledge to be able to survive in those jobs, and that's why they're paid well. And I think, you know, incenting those types of companies to come is one way that we can address it. But I think, you know, in answer to Councilor Gould's question is what can we do is, you know, we're a policy board. We're a regulatory board. We set in motion what can and cannot happen within a city. And the more difficult and restrictive we make things, the more constrained we are in terms of what we attract. We had a discussion tonight, the other subcommittee, on changing, you know, rules for inclusionary zoning. And, you know, I'm proud of the councilors here who voted against that because, you know, the last thing we need to do is to continue to create incentives for people to build things that don't include market rate housing. We need market rate housing. We're under our quota of market rate housing. So to put in a policy that would say we don't really want that is contrary to helping solve one of the key components of the problems that you identified, which is affordable housing. People need a place to live. Transportation, you know, working on getting people to public transportation in an easy and convenient manner. One of the reasons for the $50,000 study for a trolley, the idea to get people to the train station so that they can get to locations where they have to work, and having more affordable transportation that can run throughout the city, and not just the MBTA bus that has a defined route that will take you to the shopping center and over to Lynn. So I think for us, the key challenge is, as a policy board, to recognize if the problem exists, the key way that we can solve the problem is to craft policy, zoning, and legislation that fits into a view of the world that we want to hold, which is making Peabody a place where all can prosper. If we toss out those who will help us do that, or if we make it so difficult for them to come here, then ultimately that's what we end up with. We end up with the things that don't drive higher income jobs, the things that don't drive better living accommodations for people. So I think the answer is right in front of us as a policy group. That's what we should be focused on. How does anything we do impact our ability to grow this city into the type of place we want it to be, and to keep ourselves moving forward against the policy line, not backwards behind it. So thank you for coming.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us this evening. You were very informative, and I appreciate the council's questions. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you very much.